And while we would love to see your faces, if you prefer not to be recorded, you may choose to hide your video. Following the more formal panel discussion, we will take audience questions. So as you think of questions, feel free to type them into the chat. And in about 1 hour, Melissa will pull some of those questions for us and pose them to the panel. Now it gives me great pleasure to introduce our panelists for this evening. Reverend Dr. Valerie Miles-Tribble, MDiv alum, class of 2001, is Professor of Ministerial Leadership and Practical Theology here at BST. Dr. V engages liberation theology as a womanist scholar, a practical theologian, and a community activist pastor to raise critical awareness about systemic oppressions. She's written several journal publications and book chapters, and a couple of years ago, she authored the monograph, Change Agent Church in Black Lives Matter Times, Urgency for Action. And I know for a fact that she has another book in her brain and heart, and we'll be working on that in the next year or two also. Dr. V is the interim pastor at Faith Church in Oakland, California. Joining her on the panel tonight is Reverend Dr. Marie Onwubuariri, MDiv class of 2004 and DMin class of 2017. Dr. Marie is an overachiever, obviously. She's the director of intercultural ministries at American Baptist Home Mission Societies, lovingly called ABHMS in the American Baptist world. And she's also an affiliate faculty member at BST. Prior to ABHMS, Dr. Marie served as a regional executive minister in Wisconsin. She edited the book, Trouble the Water, a Christian resource for the work of racial justice, and authored the article, Reframing Tension for Transformation, Bridge Crossing, Bridge Making, Bridge Being. The third member of our panel tonight is Reverend Dr. Curtis Price, MDiv class of 2000 and DMin class of 2022. We have several high-achieving individuals tonight. Curtis is pastor at First Baptist Church in Salt Lake City, Utah, where he's been the last 14 years, I hear. Curtis has over 20 years experience as a pastor, this most recent being in Salt Lake. His DMin dissertation topic at BST was entitled Redeeming the Church, Healing and Reconciliation Between the LGBTQ Community and the Church. And finally, Reverend Dr. Michael Smith, listen to this, MDiv class of 2010, MCL class of 2011, and DMin class of 2024, a 3-time BST graduate. Give him some love. Michael has been pastor of the McGee Avenue Baptist Church in Berkeley, California for 18 years. And in 2014, he became the founding executive director of the Center for Food, Faith, and Justice, which serves as a faith-based nonprofit arm of the church and a lead organization dedicated to issues of environmental and food justice, health, equity, and economic development. His dissertation topic was the Black Earth Theology Project toward reconciliation and care of God's creation. This is a panel of phenomenal ministers of the gospel, and I am delighted to be with them this evening and can't wait to hear their wisdom on tonight's topic. So tonight is Leap into Advocacy. This year in the Alumni Engagement Office, we have focused on connection, community, and tonight, advocacy. So to begin this conversation, I'm going to invite the panelists to go ahead and be unmuted so that we can have kind of a free-flowing and organic conversation. And I'd like to start with just definitions. So I'm going to invite the panelists to take turns defining advocacy in their own words. We'd like to hear how each one of them would frame advocacy work and tell us a little bit about what it looks like to do advocacy ministry where you are. Who wants to get the ball rolling?
I'll dive in, Doc.
Thank you.
I guess for me, advocacy is really about care and concern and support for individuals or a cause, and particularly the way I see it is causes that are bigger than ourselves. So if there are issues, we've talked about racial, or gender or life orientation justice or environmental justice. If there are issues that have to do with poverty or economic justice, and really helping to be a voice. I don't like to use that term, the voiceless, because I think everybody can have a voice, but all voices aren't heard. And I think one of the things about being an advocate is you step into that space to help people find their voice, to stand for equity, for truth, and speak truth to power in that moment. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Michael. I'll jump in there and add, for me, finding those concerns, those issues that misalign with my fundamental belief in my theology that we are all made in the image of God and therefore equally valued in God's eyes and God's love, and therefore are called to treat one another with that same value. So for me, advocacy is speaking to when that is marred, when that is breached or overlooked. Just a little bit about, I guess, the context in which I found myself trying to live into this call of advocacy has been primarily in the institutional church, probably in ministry, starting at the local church level, finding myself in spaces in the denominational life, primarily in American Baptist churches. And so, and then in regional and in the national denominational spaces, and sometimes in academia. And so even in the Christian church, finding where people of God are not being fully valued, and seeking those beloved, seeking where their voices are muted, where their treatment is not what it should be, and bringing light to that. Start with that.
Thank you, Marie.
Dr. V, why don't you go ahead?
Okay, I'll let you have the last word. I think I would answer the question, what is advocacy, by first having us think about what advocacy is not. And advocacy is not speaking for or instead of the other people. Sometimes we are well-meaning and we end up patronizingly thinking that we can step into someone's lived experience and space and speak for them. That is not advocacy. And what advocacy is, therefore, is being willing to be present with people in their circumstance. And I want to just really highlight what Brother Michael said, to help people find their voice. And so Robert Lithicum has a very interesting book when he talks about being in community and being peacemakers and peace builders. And he differentiates between being in community, ministering in the community, ministering to the community, ministering with the community. Advocacy should be ministering with the community so that those who live that experience as their reality are empowered to use their voice to talk about what the needs are. We don't go in and tell them what their needs are.
That's right.
Yeah. I absolutely agree with everything everyone was saying. I think there is this sense of coming alongside and doing what we can do to empower people to find their own voice, to advocate for themselves, if it will. One kind of interesting angle that shows up in my ministry is oftentimes, in addition to kind of what we would call activism in the public square and standing alongside people in moments of injustice and things like that. One of the things that's at the center of the ministry I do in my community is advocating for people to claim their own faith in spaces, and finding safe spaces for them to claim that faith, particularly among communities where, for the faith they're coming out of, or the faith of their childhood has told them there is no place for them.
Mm.
And I find myself advocating, reclaiming that faith for themselves and letting that empower them in a way that removes or at least helps them move past the woundedness that comes from oftentimes traumatic childhood religious upbringings that have been a source of resentment and the heavy weight of hurt and trauma, and reclaiming, advocating for them to kind of find a faith of their own and articulate that faith in their own terms, is really frees them from some of that trauma and puts them on a trajectory toward kind of being freed from some of that, and toward a space of healing. And so that's another angle of advocacy, in addition to everything that's been said, that we're all kind of engaging in, is advocating for faith, really, among people who have been even wounded by faith.
I really appreciate that, Curtis, how contextual you made that in sharing with us. Everybody kind of gave their definitions. I would like to press us into your ministries and your context and maybe differentiate there. Most of you have had or do at the same time different roles in what we would classify the larger umbrella of ministry. Valerie, you have kind of public witness ministry, you have congregational ministry, you have educational ministry in the classroom. Marie, you've served congregations, you've served state regional network, now national denominational network. Michael, you've got the pastoral piece, you've got the nonprofit piece. Curtis talked in a very specific way about his church's context, which has a lot to do with where his church is located, right? Can you all talk about advocacy in those contexts, and maybe how is it different when you're acting out of your role as maybe a nonprofit leader or a classroom professor, compared with your role as a pastor, or are they not different? Can you talk about that?
I would say for me, they're not different. I think the context can be different. I think pastorally, you have to prayerfully assess the contextual needs of the community. To be very honest with you, my congregation, is traditional, older African American congregation, but my work, which goes beyond the Center for Food, Faith, and Justice. I've been in the nonprofit field for over 30 years, and it has been with people that are often considered the least of these, the formerly incarcerated, those that have been caught up in the juvenile justice system, emancipated foster care youth and families, survivors of abuse, and so on and so forth. And the irony is, you know, if I looked around my congregation, I think everyone in that congregation has been touched by one of those issues, right? Mm-hmm. But in our very comfortable places of faith in the traditional church, we don't want to admit that. We will talk about, we will talk about our professional or academic pursuits or the social organizations that we belong to. There's nothing wrong with all of that. But I often used to say to my congregation that, in California, it was said in the earlier 2000s that 1 in 4 African-American or Latinx men under 35 had been involved with the juvenile justice system or the adult criminal system. And I said, so if I looked around the congregation, 1 in 4, it doesn't matter, if you've been to Harvard, if you've been to Yale, somebody in your family been to jail. And I had people that would say to me, Pastor, don't talk about that. And I mean, I had some church mothers that would say that to me, who I grew up with their grandchildren who were incarcerated as we speak. So, and I have to be sensitive to their needs as well, but I also have to be sensitive to the needs of the women, to the men who are experiencing the trauma as they speak. So contextual ministry. And I know you haven't asked that question yet, but I think one of the great things, and I was fortunate, I think most of us were fortunate to be mentored and taught by Dr. Valerie. One of the great things about, Berkeley School of Theology has been its bend on contextual ministry as it relates to advocacy. So I want to put that out there.
All right, Michael, thank you for that. And we'll talk a little bit about BST and how it fosters these kind of things in a little bit. Valerie wanted to jump in earlier, so I want to make sure that we go to her now.
Well, I just wanted to say that when I was getting my MDiv, I came with a business background already, years in business, and I was intrigued by where businesses chose to pay attention and where businesses chose to ignore the needs of the community. So I came with that mindset and was very intrigued by the prophetic traditions and really glammed onto that in terms of understanding my ministry as a prophetic ministry. And again, getting back to your first question, if you really study the prophetic tradition, you notice that the prophets don't put words in the mouth of the people in need. They call and put on the hot seat those who are in places of power for ignoring the voices of the people in need, and that you need to open your ears and take the scales from your eyes and listen to what they're saying, because you're abusing. So that prophetic literature speaks truth to power, but again, it's not going in and presuming to be the voice of the people. And so by the time I did my my Doctor of Ministry degree, it really was intrigued by then how is the church, like Michael said, how are we contextualizing that prophetic ministry? How is the church living into walking alongside and speaking truth to power? And so like Michael, I was a little disappointed to find that churches just wanted to be the saints. Keep the
Wow.
sinners, keep the sinners out there. And I said, no, this isn't my ministry. I have too big of a mouth, and I get in too much trouble to just be isolated in here. So what it did was it inspired me to look at and really study what's happening in our communities. Who are the community organizers? What's that? Who's the advocates? What's that? Who's pastors, ministers that claim this prophetic social justice lens along with their ministry, and try to really watch and align with that. And so my DMin dissertation was studying that and what the churches could do. So I've always kind of been on the outside, trying to come back in and say, join me on the outside. And so being able to teach and hopefully inspire and encourage students to find that voice and be subversive in that passion that you have for being in the community is what has kept me going.
Yeah, thanks for that, Valerie. I love that image of like from the outside in instead of from the inside out. That's a really interesting way of thinking about that. And to think about you first began to think about advocacy through your business background. That's really, really interesting to me. So Dr. V opened the door here for kind of thinking about how she started her advocacy work and where she was noticing things that brought that out in her. So those of you others, what compelled you to do ministry through advocacy? And you were all selected because we can clearly see by the work that you do in your ministry that advocacy is a big part of it. So what compelled you in that direction? Is there a story? Did you have an experience? What was that for you? And then I'll piggyback on that since Michael opened the door earlier. Was there something in your experience at BST that opened the door for you to live fully into that kind of ministry? So it's kind of a two-part question there. Who wants to tackle that?
I'll jump in there.
All right.
So I think what compelled me started in my formative years, but I didn't realize it till later on. So in my upbringing, which I often refer back to because it was so foundational, was growing up in not only a church context, but a neighborhood that was transitioning from a predominantly white space to a more multicultural, multiracial, multi-ethnic space. So that has always been my experience in church, in school, in neighborhood, and brought all of that when I started seminary. And it was very early on in BST or ABSW at the time that I took a J-term course called Multicultural Leadership or Intercultural Leadership. And that kind of like gave me words for the call that I think I more live into now. And it's understanding, kind of what I said with my theology of we are all God's people, yet for whatever reasons, well, we know some reasons, for very intentional oppressive reasons, not all people have been able to fully live into who they are and who they were created to be. And so that quickly turned into a sense of call to intercultural ministries, particularly advocating for people of color in predominantly white spaces, but in the church context in other ways. So in the church context, it was advocating sometimes for women, particularly women in ministry, sometimes younger folks, although I'm not that anymore. I started off on the younger end. And so I'm being challenged to remember what that felt like, and so turning that around, particularly immigrant and refugee communities, which have been part of my experience growing up. English as second language learners have been part of the journey. And so it was at BST that I found that call. It was at BST that I had leaders in the denominational spaces that either taught at the seminary or were pastors connected to the seminary who were teaching with us in the classroom, who were sites that we went to visit and took what we were learning into the classroom out into local churches and in the communities that they were serving. So right away, my whole network of examples of people who were living into a sense of justice and what it looked like to advocate for those who were often overlooked was my world. And so that's kind of what compelled me. Kind of what I also learned at BST and what I've formed not only through my MDiv, but certainly in my DMin work. Again, shout out to Dr. V, who was very instrumental walking me through that, was what advocacy can look like. And there's two things I'll name is one, the call to see who is unseen. So we've talked about that, but learning how to take the posture as a learner. So Dr. V talked about being with, right? So slowing down first. Angie, you called all of us what high achievers. High achievers don't slow down much. So learning how to slow down and be with people and taking the posture of a learner and actually listening to their circumstance, listening to not only their needs, but their gifts. And sometimes listening for their ask. And sometimes that ask doesn't come directly, right? Especially if you're working with people who don't have direct communication styles. They're not always going to come out and say, this is what I need. So learning how to be in their context and looking for what they're asking for, what they need. And then learning how to do the self-work of recognizing where we have been given privilege, where we have been on the side of the dynamics of power, where we're in a position to shed light or to give platform to, or I would suggest, Dr. V, sometimes voicing their concern. When you're going internationally and you're with communities and they know there's a centrality of power in the US, they'll say, bring my voice with you, be my voice for me, because they're not physically there sometimes at the table. And so sometimes it is being their voice, but not staying there, right? Advocating that it's not always you speaking for them. Sometimes it starts that way, but broadening the table so that they can be there as well, or can speak directly to what their needs are. So yeah, doing the work so that those that you work with will be seen, and the self-work where we recognize we are in positions because of the gifts we've given through education, through positions, and not shying away from that and using it for good. And it's hard when you identify yourself with the people that you're advocating for, right? I'm a person of color, I'm a woman, I was a young clergy, yet I had certain privileges that they didn't. And so I couldn't wallow in that just self-identity, but step into the places that I had access to.
Oh, thanks, Marie. Michael or Curtis, either one of you want to tackle that question or those questions about what compelled you into this type of ministry? Go ahead, Curtis. I saw your hand.
Sure. So I'm here in Salt Lake City, Utah. Very unique population, and I grew up here. So that was my context. I grew up in Utah, and it's a place where there is a huge religious majority that teaches that LGBTQ people are outside of God's plan, that women have no role in leadership, that questioning is a weakness, and that the center of the world is America. And it's a very white, I mean, it's the whitest place in the world, it feels like. I grew up in this, and so anyone who's kind of outside this, who doesn't conform to this notion about what normal is or what religion is kind of on the margins. So, in my mind, I grew up as this weird minority in Utah. However, I don't know if you know this about me, but I am a white, male, straight, cisgendered, poster child for privilege in the world. And within it wasn't until I came to ABSW. It was only at the time, it was the American Baptist Seminary. It was only there when that was when I first knew there was a conversation happening about LGBTQ issues, about women in ministry. Although I won't get into this, but in Utah, we had plenty of women pastors. And that's mainly because women were willing to come to Utah where men were not. So, these are pioneers who really paved the way. And so I grew up thinking that was normal. But, I didn't know these conversations were happening, because I was never exposed to that in my faith community growing up. And so, that was within ABSW, those conversations were really happening, and it was really ramping up. And it was during a regional fight, when I was a youth pastor, that I found myself pushed into a corner and had to choose sides about the LGBTQ issue. And I finally, it was being pushed into this corner and recognizing who was being pushed out of that conversation and how amazing their voices were within the community, that really pushed me to say, you know what, this is BS. I'm not sitting the fence anymore. I'm choosing sides, and I'm choosing the side of inclusion. And so I went from there. And slowly over time have really recognized what an important ministry it is to be in this, to create safe space for healing. And this is what because of what I experienced at First Baptist Church in Salt Lake City. When I first got there, the issue of LGBTQ inclusion was hot and heavy, not only in our denomination, but around the whole nation. And particularly in Utah, there was a constant barrage of legislation and stuff like that was pushing the LGBTQ population into the margins even further. And I really found my footing in activism around some of the nonsense legislation. But probably even more significantly, it was the ministry that was happening within First Baptist Church. People were coming with this woundedness, with this, my church is full of gay men who were married for 20 years, who have 4 children, who were trying to make it work because they were told by their religious leaders that if they just started having children, that everything would work out. If they just got into a marriage, they just found the right person. And it just, and they found themselves 20 years later in a destroyed relationship. Sometimes their kids aren't even speaking to them because of what they taught them growing up about all of that. And they come to a space, they're looking for, it's remarkable to me that anyone walks through the church doors after that kind of trauma, but here they come saying, I want to claim my faith, and I want to be my whole self in that. And I saw the work of First Baptist Church, or the space of First Baptist Church, become this space of healing, and where people could reclaim the good parts of this, their faith that shaped who they are growing up, and they could continue on that trajectory and articulate it for themselves. And it was and that's what prompted me to ask the question, which was the basis of my dissertation, of can the institution that has caused so much harm, the Christian faith, can that same institution be the source of healing for this community? And I, I'm praying every day that the answer is yes, that we can. And we're in Salt Lake. We're trying to figure out how to take this beyond, because the church has very limited reach. Obviously, I can't wait for people to come walking through the door, because they're not doing that much. So, how do we take this safe? How do we extend that safe space out into the community? So, we at First Baptist Church, we try to we're all over Pride, the Pride Festival, and years ago I came up with this idea of pray, like walking around and offering free prayer to people at the Pride Festival. And my gay administrators thought I would get my ass kicked at at Pride, walking around offering free prayer. But I found just the opposite, that people were just so eager to engage this thing that for many they thought was a dead part of themselves, and the amazing prayers that happen there. And then we also spend time down at the Pride Center repenting, saying we're sorry, listening to people.
Wow.
Listening to people tell us about their faith. And my only message is, don't let them take that away from you. Don't let them say to you, you can't have a faith. But claim it, take it. That's yours. It belongs to you. No one can take that away from you. And because I think I think it's empowering. I think it's empowering to be able to say, this is mine and you can't take it away from me. I know you think you can, but you can't. And I've seen a lot of healing happen with that. And so that's kind of the trajectory that began at ABSW, when the question was posed, are we, is Christianity inclusive or not? Which I had never, I grew up in such an isolated world. I had never considered those questions before, and it really posed those questions and put me on a trajectory toward where we're at now, in a ministry that I love and is just amazing. And because I see the incredible Holy Spirit, Jesus stuff happening in people's hearts that we pray for in people. So I guess that's my story right there.
Thank you, Curtis. It was really beautiful. And we can tell that you're passionate about it, for sure. Michael, did you have something you wanted to add to that before we shift gears?
The only thing I would add to that is that this work, I started, as a youth minister as well. And again, working with young people of all kinds of issues and multiple issues. And the work that God has given me, with community and family over time, what has taught me to do, and this is where I do think, again, contextually, BST comes in. It has taught me to be a better listener. It has taught me to be a better listener and understanding the language of love, the love of God that comes in many ways. And I think that is something, when we talk about advocacy, we should never, discount. The voices of those closest to the pain, if they're listened to, they'll give you the message almost the same way that the Spirit speaks from within, so I'll just say that and leave it there.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate both you and Marie really drawing attention to listening, because so often, we look at that middle root part of advocacy, right? Advocate, that VOC, right? We think voice. We always think voice, right? And to hear you both say, and you've all said it in your own way, that really hearing, that listening. So actually having the mouth closed is kind of number one, right? I love that you have brought that to our attention. That's a really big learning for tonight. So it's 2024. 2025 is right around the corner. And I heard somebody say over the weekend, said something about COVID, and all of a sudden it dawned on me, we're coming up on 5 years since the COVID pandemic changed the world. I can't believe it's going to be 5 years, for one thing. But we all know COVID's still in our communities. We're no longer in what they say is a pandemic, but we're learning to live with this thing. So I would ask all of you in your different roles, what are you seeing now, almost 5 years beyond the height of the crisis? Who remains on the margins? What are the needs in our communities? What kind of advocacy is needed in these days on this side of the pandemic? Anybody have thoughts about that?
I'll start there. Oh.
Go ahead, Marie.
I guess what first comes to mind is young voices. So in 2020, I was still in Wisconsin, and one of the things that struck me the most, so I said most of my work is done in institutional work, but have done a little work in K-12 public school, and at the time was trying to advocate for more inclusive approaches to education in my suburb. And in 2020, I remember just being so struck that it was the young people, the students, who rose up in the Black Lives Matter protests in this white suburban, the ideological conservative turning progressive suburb. And despite the work that parents or educators were doing in the school system for DEI and more inclusive approaches, it was the young people that really advocated for themselves in that moment. Some of the hard work of advocacy is that you see the little wins along the way, and then sometimes it just gets shut down. And so in 2021, I had already left, but the work that was being done in that school district got shut down with what was happening politically at that time. So here in 2024, with many of the same fears going into another presidential election very present in people, again, I'm hearing young voices. I'm just coming out of an event in DC where it was the young voice on the panel that really spoke to the need to really just transform our understanding of democracy. And it's not just, vote for the least worst candidate, but let's really calling for transformation. And so just trying to lean into that and listening to the young voices who are disenfranchised with so much more beyond the pandemic, but everything that has come along with that global crisis. So that's just what's on my heart. I don't have an answer necessarily, but those are the voices I'm trying to listen to these days.
Thanks, Marie. Valerie?
I think, and I want to give a little context too, because I didn't mention my background, but I think coming from the inner city of Philadelphia, growing up in segregated inner city Philadelphia, I've grown up with those sensibilities of being different. I write about that in my book, some of the comments I overheard people headed to the suburbs saying about my neighborhood. And so having the opportunity still to grow up in a household where school and education was emphasized, it gave me the opportunity to eventually work my way out here after going to an HBCU where there was further drilled into me to know thyself, appreciate thyself, be proud of your community, find your voice. But when I came out here, you know, I saw things, and this isn't just Black Lives Matter. That's why I titled my book Black Lives Matter Times since Nixon era on up. Because when I came out here to Oakland, Oakland was at the time, maybe as much as, Michael, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was heading up there towards 70-75% African American.
Absolutely.
It was
Absolutely.
a huge African American community, sense of pride, Oakland A's, et cetera. And I saw this gradual influx of even police that they were recruiting from the South and other places that would hit with batons and disrupt groups of young people and families first before asking questions. So this whole notion of police violence didn't just start
Right.
in 2014. That's what's important when you ask, how did we form our context and our lens? It was running for our lives in the middle of what was supposed to be an Oakland Arts Festival around the lake, because police decided to come in there. They suspected somebody, and they were just going to roll over anyone that was in the way. So that kind of suspicion in communities was very real and present, together with the gentrification and watching that 75% whittle down to 60, whittle down to 50, whittle down to 40, and now it's about 20-something, 30% of African American in Oakland. I don't know about the changes in Berkeley, but the thing is, as it gentrifies, you have people that come in with different values, different expectations, and different sets of privilege that don't feel like they have to listen to others. So it's on that context that I became really passionate about encouraging people to use their voice and not roll over and be pushed out of your housing. Oakland did a huge redevelopment effort then. And what it did, it moved all the Black people in West Oakland and downtown that were renting, as very wealthy people from Marin and San Francisco bought those houses and got the redevelopment money at very low interest rates. And once they got it, they were displacing folks. So this is early 2000s, not 2014. This is the 1990s, 2000s. So this kind of thing has been going on, which is why when you had Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown and others, it erupted the community, because now the blatantness of it, the blame game of it just really erupted, as Marie said, in the young people. You know, don't you all see what's happening in our communities? We've been feeling it all along. And so the importance of our churches understanding what's going on, even among their constituencies and their families, was something that I think, with community organizing and pastors with awareness coming together, even through the Linton Caravan and the kinds of things that Michael and other pastors would talk about. It's what inspired me, even before finishing seminary, to start a leadership development consultancy role, working with pastors and boards to be in tune with what's happening. So when we get to COVID, and remember, COVID already has been turned upside down, and already oppressive.
That's right.
Election. Okay. So you already have the trauma of this despot in office, and then COVID hits, and watching the way he handles it with get bleach or whatever silly things he would say, it further traumatized. So I think that the thing that I value BST for, and what we've been trying to do with our students, is to provide a safe place where we can talk about those kinds of things, raise up the hypocrisies, ask the questions, and to encourage students to make up in their minds, what is your theology? And how do you embody that in your praxis? What is justice? What is advocacy? What is restorative justice? What is peace building? Wonderful terms. But if we don't understand the implications and the impact, as well as the risk, and be willing to take those, then we're just going through the motions. And I'm very proud that BST has been at the forefront in the GTU of opening up that kind of dialogue, that kind of course, those kinds of courses, and the kind of leadership that we have to overhaul our curriculum and say, let's prepare leaders to be real public justice leaders.
Thanks, Valerie. Michael must have lost his connection. I think we lost him. I don't see him on the screen. Maybe he'll jump back in. Curtis, did you have something you wanted to add to that question, or should we transition? Okay.
No, go ahead.
Okay. I've got my eye on the time. I know that we're on a schedule. So what I want to do is I'm gonna kind of ask two sort of opposite things for sort of a quick answer, maybe a one word or a couple word phrase. So from each of you, what's the biggest challenge in doing advocacy work? Your biggest challenge, one couple words. And then on the opposite end, if you were to close your eyes and think about success, for lack of a better word, what do you see? And again, if we can keep those kind of short, maybe you see a particular person's face, that you worked alongside, that somehow, really grew or something, or maybe you see a family, or maybe you see a particular ministry. So biggest challenge, kind of a short answer, maybe one couple words, and then a success story that's in your mind's eye. And then we're going to transition to some questions from the audience, and then we'll do our closing question, our anchor question, after we take some questions from the audience. Biggest challenge? Yeah.
I'll jump in, Angie, because people are coming into my house, so I'm going to mute in a little bit. So biggest challenge, I don't always use this term, but since you're limiting us in words, oppression Olympics.
Oh, wow.
And then
Oppression Olympics.
Oppression Olympics. And then, or perceived, right? Perceived emphasis on one need versus another. That's another way to say it. And then success story. So I'll say Pastor Apollo. So the other little piece that I got to be a part of is advocating for international students when I was in the admissions office. So he actually started applying while I was in that role. But that, I mean, just celebrating him tonight is an example of how BST advocates to give education to whosoever will come and has that desire to grow so that they can make impact.
Awesome. So the challenge Marie named was the Perceived Oppression Olympics. And then that face of success that she imagined was Pastor Apollo and others like him. Okay, who else?
I'll say for me, quite frankly, the biggest challenge in trying to bring advocacy to the forefront has truly been struggling and fighting in the traditional church. I've literally had some folks say to me, lead them people out there. I mean, literally said that. I would say the biggest success for me, I think there are two things that are fold within the context of our Center for Food, Faith, and Justice. Pastor Michael McBride and I have been working on this issue of violence prevention and violence intervention in Berkeley. Obviously, both of us started doing work in Oakland years ago, and Oakland was more at the forefront of implementing this ceasefire model that Dr.
Right.
Valerie is all too familiar with. We got Berkeley to finally agree, and he and I have been on the front line with this for almost 20 years. And they finally appropriated money for us to do it in Berkeley after almost 20 years. And so that's a blessing. The other one with Food, Faith, and Justice, we have started our job training program in the areas of urban agriculture and food waste reduction and environmental justice. We got that funded by the state of California, Department of Food and Agriculture. We have like 50 people in cohorts of like 15, 16 that we're working with. And so now we're actually engaging them. Young people, young adults who wouldn't otherwise have opportunities for paid job training to do that. So we're really excited about that. And it just says that God is still shining.
Thank you, Michael. So one of the biggest challenges is still fighting against the traditional church and the structures in place there, and then a celebration of public funding for 2 different projects, it sounds like, after many years of hard work. Good for you. Thank you for that. We celebrate. Curtis, Valerie, either one?
Curtis.
Well, I would say the biggest challenge is the trauma that people have experienced from the institutional church. And I would say the victory is reclaimed faith that helps people find their voice.
Beautiful, beautiful. Trauma and reclaimed faith on the other end. Okay, Valerie, we'll let you have the last one for this question.
I would say complacency
Mm.
and denial are the hand-in-hand challenges.
Okay.
And in terms of successes and the faces that I see, those would be our students. To see the light bulbs go on, to see the growth and the aha moments from the time they come in the door and start taking some of our classes and being stretched, and then finding their voice. By the time they graduate, they're not afraid to talk. They're not afraid to speak. They're not afraid to strategize. They're not afraid to be used in powerful ways. And we have a number of examples of that.
Oh, I love it. Complacency and denial on one end, and yet people are still coming to learn and stretch and grow and lead. And how exciting and beautiful that is. Thank you, Valerie, for that. So do we have questions from the audience tonight that you'd like to pose to the panel? We were hoping to have some in the chat. I don't know if we do or not.
I put a question in the chat for
Okay, Judith.
Smith. I don't know if he can see it.
Well, can you just, will you just go ahead and
okay.
pose it then? We were hoping Melissa was going to read those to us, and since she can't see it.
Well, I can go ahead. I was trying to post it again, but I wasn't able to. I could just read it then. I asked, could you please repeat the percentage of African American Hispanic people who have been in the criminal justice system?
In California, it's like 1 in 4 males under the age of like 32, 33 years old.
Okay, now is that both for African American and Hispanic?
Yes, that's African American and Latinx men in the state of California.
Okay, so you're combining them. You're not separating.
No, it's some form of under some form of correctional control. And what correctional control means, that means you've either been in the juvenile justice system, the adult criminal system, probation, or on parole, or you are incarcerated.
Okay, 1 in 4. Okay, so do you have it specifically just for African American males?
I do, but I don't have it right in front of me. But the number of African American males is actually even a little higher.
That's what I was gonna say.
It's actually a little higher.
Ratio-wise, it's higher, yeah.
So the main point is, when this is happening, it really does affect the family. It can't help but
affect the family. if you got somebody in your family that has somebody in their family that's incarcerated, usually one or two things is going to happen. Either you live in denial, and you don't really want to deal with it. And I had people in the congregation deal with that. Or, you know, for some folks, sadly, it becomes, well, that's just what we do.
Mhm.
I've literally had people say that to me. This is just how we live.
Mhm.
So yeah, it can't not help but affect us one way or the other.
Now, do you include in that too how the effects of if someone in the family is in some type of addiction or drug addiction, how that negatively affects the whole family?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, it's all wrapped up. If we understand addiction as an illness, if somebody is living with addiction, and oftentimes the issues of addiction, mental and emotional, health can kind of go along with that. The lived experience of those people, could impact in several ways, and again, that could be including an up to family violence, despondency. It could be a lot of factors. I think my bigger point, though, is that type of trauma does not remain constant. It's going to manifest one way or the other, regardless.
Is there a way to approach it to where, like you said, since it's so dominant in the community, to where people could try to deal with it, to come together instead of feeling so much shame? There are a lot of people go into denial, and that's because of the shame. But if they could come out of the shame, that could be a healing process and really helping the entire community.
Absolutely, but I also think that there are so many mitigating factors. I'm dealing with families right now, and if see part of the thing, and I don't want to dominate the conversation, but I'm just going to tell you that the language of the academy, and even the language of the seminary is not necessarily the same as the language of the street.
Mhm.
And so how do we bridge those gaps? Because at the end of the day, I'll tell you, Dr. Valerie knows our good friend, Reverend Dr. Kelvin Sauls. And we do a lot of work around environmental advocacy. And Dr. Sauls said to me, because we're dealing with some folks also in South Africa, and he said when he poses the issues around climate justice and climate change, he said the brothers and sisters will say to him, okay, Rev, I care about the environment too. I care about what happens to the earth too. But right now I'm hungry. I need something to eat. Right now I need a place to stay. And so those hierarchy of needs often take precedent. It doesn't mean the other things don't matter, but we got to really have to be willing to do what Jesus did, which is meet people where they're at, feed the body and the soul at the same time.
Thank you, Michael, and thanks for your question, Judith. We have two other questions that I want to get to. We have an anonymous question that Melissa's going to pose here in a moment, and President Brenneman has a question.
So the anonymous one, what specific skills and competencies not already mentioned today do today's seminary students need to acquire to do advocacy well in this time?
Dr. B, can you answer that question? I'm going to have you speak to that one.
Yes, I was about to say that to Michael's point, and Judith's questions, and I think this is a very important competency. And one of the reasons why we revised our curriculum into these different areas of emphasis to encourage students to consciously select where they want to build up their courses and their skill sets. Because you can't handle any of these problems without really understanding that there are systems and structures behind it. There's systems and structures that are causative factors in these sociological or socioeconomic or trauma-induced problems that we have. So building one competency, I think that we have been paying a lot of attention to is building awareness and empowering students in their classes to do real life research and projects, looking not only at the prevailing issue, but what are the systems and structures and the rhetoric. Derek put in the chat something about code switching. What's the rhetoric around that? And how do you take a hermeneutic of suspicion to see through some of that rhetoric and be able to understand what needs to be done to counter that, to raise awareness in the churches, that sort of thing. So that, I think, is a competency. Yes, understanding the scriptures and the Bible is very important, particularly as Dr. Flesher and Eric have been teaching it, to help you understand that even back in that ancient time, they were challenging systems and structures and presumptive language. So certainly we have to do that in the complexities of today.
All right. Dr. Brenneman, would you like to pose your question?
So my question really, it's come up in several levels of the conversation, where oftentimes we see advocacy or prophetic calling as peripheral to the system. You know, from the outside, you're calling the system to change. You know, when we live in a democracy, I'm wondering, this would be a conversation about, there were court prophets that were good as well. First Isaiah being one. What are your thoughts about advocacy within the system as a prophetic vocation? And I'm thinking of people like, let's say in the African-American tradition, we don't often think of Thurgood Marshall. You know, he's at the height of the judicial system in America. And yet I would wonder, he would advocate for particular points of view. But that said, so in some ways, we seldom call people like him a prophet in the same way, and because he sullied his hands potentially by being part of the system.
Right.
And so I'm wondering, I'd like to hear from you all, or Barbara Lee, who's a representative, or people, or for that matter, Cornel West, who's running for president. I mean, here you have Cornel West. We always think of it sort of one of these outside peripheral prophets who are calling, you know, from outside, and here he's running for the not that he'll win, but he's still running for the highest position of the land. So somehow in his own mind, he's sufficiently somehow accepting the notion of a prophet within a system, if you will, in order to revolutionize the system. Any thoughts on advocacy within the system?
I'm going to let my colleagues talk, but I would just push back a little bit, Dr. JB, and say we're all operating and living within the system.
Right.
And none of us are outside of the systems and the structures in which we have to critique. So
good.
Let me just open that up for others.
I would jump in this and say this too, because I agree with Dr. Valerie. And I have big respect for those sheroes and heroes that you have mentioned. I do think that we have to recognize what it means also to be in the belly of the beast. And we just have to contextualize that. I'll leave it there.
Well, I would also add to that and say that, you know, to be within the system, we can't be afraid to turn the prophetic eye inward, right? And point to, you know, get your own house straight. You know, before remove the plank from your own eye before you remove the speck of dust from your neighbor. And you know, we need to be courageously turning the prophetic voice toward the institution in order to move forward too.
I'd add to that, just recalling back to a couple of questions that were named. I think some of the challenge when working within the system, one is negotiating stakeholders, that when you're in the system, to some level, you're accountable to. Within the church, sometimes, you know, the mission giving is supporting your salary, right? So
my Lord.
That's where the self-work comes in recognizing where your own protections of your own self and your own family and your own well-being might get caught up in some of your own decision makings and your courage. So I think those are some of the challenges of working within the system. And the question of competencies, one of the things that that we're seeing, that we're trying to work on in Home Mission Society, are the competencies of networking and capacity building. And that's financial capacity, but it's relational capacity, because we have to work in collaboration. Like the things that we are all fighting against and advocating for, I think it was Pastor Mike said, it's much bigger than ourselves. And if we don't learn how to build capacity with others and network with others in ways that are still honoring, and some of those partners are those in power. So I think those are competencies that we're seeing much needed in 21st century leaders.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Yeah.
I am going to ask one final question and give the panelists an opportunity for a brief word on this question. So I want to close the conversation today by linking it to Dr. Brenneman's message and to his vision and theme for this year. And I want to ask you all, how does or can advocacy work anchor our communities in hope?
I would share this, that in our social political realm, there has been much to be made of mocking hope. When someone brings up hope, and this is not just, right wingers, even people on the left will, talk about, the problems of advocating for hope. But we are, in the words of Niebuhr, prisoners of hope. And that it is the hope, right? It is the hope of our Lord and Savior, not pie in the sky when you die, but is the hope of bringing and ushering in the beloved community here and now, the kingdom of heaven here on earth. And if we do not advocate for hope as the women and men of God, as the people of God, as the people of faith, who are willing to say that in spite of what we see, in spite of unfairness, in spite of injustice, in spite of these things, if we are not willing to advocate for hope, and this, I know this is existential and theological and Christological, but if that's not what we're willing to do, why do we embrace Calvary?
Mm-hmm.
Why would we embrace Calvary? And whatever forms of you understand, the crucifixion and the resurrection. And so for me, it is the belief, my hope is built on nothing less, right? And I think we have to advocate for that. And we have that responsibility as men and women of faith, particularly as purveyors of the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Amen. Thank you, Michael. Anybody else have a word about advocacy being an anchor of hope?
I would just say maybe the other way around. We don't advocate unless we have hope. I mean, why else speak up for something that we believe in?
That's
if
right.
we don't have hope that there can be something different.
Yes.
They're inextricable.
Yes.
So in order to do authentic, well-intentioned advocacy work, it must, that work must be anchored.
Right.
In
Yeah.
hope.
Absolutely. You have to believe that hearts can change, institutions can change, the world can change, that the arc of justice is long but bends towards justice, and that there is a new day coming, and soon and very soon we're going to experience what Jesus called the kingdom of God in small ways and in large ways. So I agree with Marie. Why we wouldn't get up in the morning?
We don't have it. That's right.
Without a
Surely
little.
wouldn't be in ministry unless we had hope.
Right.
We better not be.
Yeah,
There you
okay.
go. That's probably right, Michael. We better not be.
We're not in it for the money.
Right.
So one of the things that, in answer to that question, I'm thinking of is, you know, there's so much. We're also confronted with not only our churches getting smaller, but our seminary enrollments getting smaller.
Mm.
I think that that's because somehow there's so many people that believe and have drunk the Kool-Aid that church is no longer relevant, and
That's right.
theology ministry is no longer relevant. And how do we counter that? We have to be, I think, ready to learn what we can, but you got to, and I don't want to use the word coding, but you have to meaning make what you learn and turn it into, as Dr. J. Alfred Smith says, make it plain. So you have to be able to take what you learn here and add the secret sauce and make it relevant for going back out into your community and speaking the language of the people and listening to the people. And so I will just leave you with one of the old respected theologians, Jürgen Moltmann, known as the theologian of hope. And he's written this beautiful little book called The Spirit of Hope, Theology for a World in Peril.
Yeah.
And it is the most real book, you know, that I have read in a long time in these little chapters. And I would urge for you to get it. In fact, it's online free from the World Council of Churches. You can download the entire PDF of the book, but it gives us something to really think about. What is hope and how do we make it plain for the people who are feeling hopeless? How do we make it plain on the streets in which we have to walk and serve and listen and respond?
Thank you, Valerie. That's the final word for the panel this evening. Dr. Brenneman, I think after this conversation, we are indeed anchored in hope and ready to seize the future on behalf of ourselves and our neighbors and this world in need. This has been one of the richest conversations I have ever participated in. I want to thank each of you so very much. Reverend Dr. Valerie Miles-Tribble, Reverend Dr. Marie Onwubuariri, Reverend Dr. Michael Smith, and Reverend Dr. Curtis Price. It has been my absolute joy and delight to facilitate this conversation and to share this with you this evening. Thank the rest of you for coming, for spending the evening with us, listening to these scholars, preachers, teachers, pastors, advocates, activists who've brought their gifts and their hearts and their thoughtfulness to this conversation. We are all so very grateful. So show the panelists some love if you want to, throw up an emoji or, you know, clap your hands. Thank you all so much.
Bless you all.
And Melissa, I'm going to invite you now to take the mic and to close us out.
Yeah, thank you all. We're gonna stop the recording now. Hold the phone. Hold that thought.